We have a pleasure to listen to Yuri here at Tartu. Please, Professor, give him a...
Okay, it's coming. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, it's a real pleasure to be here, but it's a different feeling. Because I arrived from Tallinn yesterday, and I arrived like a different kind of country. It's Northern Livonia with its capital called Tartu. And I've noticed as a historian more and more, every year, more and more, the differences in mentalities, the differences in attitudes, maybe less in language. And I've sometimes randomly asking local, real Tartuians, like we were taught in Toronto, that the citizens of Tartu College in Toronto are Tartuians, so the Chinese students call them. What about, how many times have you visited Tallinn recently? Not so much, maybe some 4 months, 6 months ago. That's a good sign. Something is still dropping apart. I'm absolutely serious because you know this topic is included into the European Union discussion already. Two-speed Estonia, what does it mean? But my aim was actually to bring you to a very strange journey back to the year 0 in Germany, Stunde Null, 1945, and to bring back into memory the Baltic University. I honestly admit that I'm repeating my paper I read once in Toronto with some kind of modifications, but my mission is to bring it back to our memory, not to forget it, because as a historian I'm fighting against the forgetting of history, forgetting of cultural heritage, whatever heritage altogether. So, the end of World War II left Germany in political and economic chaos, in ruins. This was the very high price paid for the total war and brutality of the Nazi regime. Furthermore, at the close of the war, Germany became the center of unprecedented migration of peoples. Beyond the estimated 66 million Germans, there were perhaps 8 million nationals of other countries in Germany. Primarily war refugees from the East European and East Central European countries, but also those released from the concentration camps and labor camps, not to speak about around 10 million German refugees, ethnic Germans who escaped or were violently deported from various countries of Central and Eastern Europe. In this Babel, in post-war Germany, approximately 200,000 refugees from former Baltic countries of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia had found temporary shelter and were fighting for their survival. One should mention, however, that the statistical data of Baltic refugees in Germany are quite different in various scholarly books and articles. Raimond Kriščiūnas proposed in his article that 60,000 Lithuanians were located in Western Europe and not exactly in Germany at the end of the war. 50,000 of them were the refugees of 1944, 50,000 Lithuanians. Latvian official sources suggest that there were around 120,000 Latvians in post-war West Germany. That's a lot. And a total of 40,000 Estonians reached Germany in 1944, as estimated in a recent study by Kaja Kummer-Haukenem. The internet website Camps in Germany for Refugees from Baltic countries has different numeric data, suggesting that the beginning of 1945 there were 171,000 residents of Latvia in the German Reich and that according to different sources, the number of Lithuanians varies from 60 to 70,000. Regarding the Estonians, this website proposes that at the end of the war, at least once more again, 40,000 of them were in Germany. However, the best documentation, TP Chronica by Ferdinand Kohl, claims that there were 33,000 Estonians in TP camps in Germany. The variances of the statistical data are perhaps caused by the political realities. The Allied occupied Germany was divided, as you know very well, into 4 major occupation zones or sectors: American, British, French, and Soviet zones of occupation. Data on displaced persons, or DPs as we call them, from the American, British, and French zones are relatively correct. Contrary to this, the lists of refugees and camp records from the Soviet zone have not been accessible to the researchers. They are, for us, practically non-existing. Well, due to the ideological stance of the Soviet Union, no DP camps were ever set up in its zone. We have forgotten this small detail. Displaced persons were expected to be quickly repatriated or else to integrate into Soviet society. The Baltic refugees in the Soviet zone attempted to avoid repatriation and thus tried to escape to the American and British zone of occupation. It wasn't so easy, but this is another issue for scholarly research. It is somehow remarkable that the birth of the idea of Baltic University and its realization originated from the British zone, consisted of Schleswig-Holstein, Hamburg, Lower Saxony, and the present-day state of North Rhine-Westphalia. If we can estimate the number of Estonians in Germany in the autumn of 1944 at 40,000, then according to the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, so-called UNRWA, statistical data, in October 1946 there were 31,241 Estonians in West Germany. Of these, 53%, close to 17,000, were located in the American zone, close to 14,000 or 43% in the British zone, and only 855% in the French zone. The data, these data contain at least still few thousand Estonians who were outside of these statistics. I mean here, let me say, those soldiers who were currently in prisoners of war camps. So altogether, perhaps 10,000 Estonians could have been living outside of DP camps. What is missing here is the comparative statistics on Lithuanian and Latvian refugees. In the British zone, perhaps I haven't discovered these sources yet. Furthermore, the data of professional and social profile of the Baltic refugees have not been available as well. This strange picture here is by a Lithuanian artist. Well, this is now the famous UNRWA and its pirog, that everybody is trying to get its own piece, to cut its own piece from UNRWA for all kind of needs and activities of DP camps. So, what's back to these data, we have to trust the general statement by Elmar Järvesoo, the author of a major documentation on Baltic University, that the DP camps developed a very efficient system of elementary and high schools, yet there were no university courses offered in the DP camps. Therefore, the idea of creating the university courses for the Baltic DPs was discussed parallel to the campaign to register the Baltic students for the admissions to German universities already in fall 1945. Imagine, the German universities were opened once more again and available to enroll for academic courses. Järvesoo argues that the main initiative to establish the university courses for the Baltic, or perhaps only for the Estonian DPs, was carried out by the Hamburg Estonian Committee in a small circle of academics like Professor Julius Magister, a young lawyer Karl Aun, Doctor of Agronomy Elmar Järvesoo, and the chemist Voldemar Kirs. As you know, the literary scholar Tiina Kirs, it's Tiina Kirs' father. So, however, in all further and decisive negotiations with the British military administration, and particularly with their education control unit, the Baltic delegation consisted of representatives of all three Baltic nations. It means that similar kind of ideas were discussed among the leaders of a Lübeck Latvian committee. They had three academics of the University of Latvia in their leadership: Professor Fritsis Kulbis, Professor Edgars Tunstors, and Professor Eizens Leimanis. These two groups were supported by the Hamburg Lithuanian Committee with their experienced lawyers and other specialists like Stonkus, Jonas Montvila, and later on Professor Vladimir Stankevičius, alias Vladas Stanka. Now, the purpose of a Baltic University in Hamburg and later on in Pinneberg includes two main aspects. Let me see if I can see. So, yeah, well, the Baltic University logo here, Baltic Unity, three flags all together. And now the idea. First, to offer the university studies for those Baltic refugees who graduated the high schools in their homelands before or during World War II, or for these young refugees whose university studies ceased in times of war and who aim to continue their studies at German universities or even in some other countries. The second aspect concerns the academic staff of the former Baltic universities who tried to find academic jobs and continue their research and teaching activities. It's very strange to be an academic and to be unemployed. Imagine for a second. Doing nothing. Therefore, it is interesting here. After severe years in the Baltic, these people also were interested in the legitimation of their academic status and profile, thinking on future. So, therefore, I don't know. I'm still keeping the position that very many refugees, academic refugees in Germany, were thinking not to return home soon, but to go further. Question mark for discussion. So the motivation to join the Baltic University was extremely high in the British zone, well, leaving aside all details of numerous official and semi-official meetings, there's a lot of them, discussions and respective decisions in fall already 1945. Imagine, fall 1945. One can conclude that the Baltic University was born under the favorable protection of British military administration and in cooperation and due to the activities of the representatives of free Baltic refugee communities in Germany. Altogether, that's a very interesting, rapid cooperation. This certainly was a unique case of mutual understanding and support in the history of these countries. I'm running ahead before and after the Second World War. It never happened before, it never happened after. So, in the British zone, altogether 1,329 eventual Baltic students were enrolled by the organizing committee in October, registered actually in 1945. But now the scale, 650 Latvians, almost 500 Lithuanians, and only 182 Estonian prospective students. And altogether, 168 faculty members were registered by the organizing committee by the end of the year 1945. Among them were 70 Latvian, 65 Lithuanian, and 33 Estonian academics. The relatively high number of teaching faculty results in the ratio of 8 students for 1 instructor. In following years, the ratio stabilized at 15:1. Is it reasonable today? Most universities say yes. The Baltic University was a fantastic achievement. To create an almost complete university with 8 faculties and 17 departments in the middle of Hamburg ruins, post-war chaos and hunger, this was a true miracle. The completion of a faculty system had some specific features depending on existing academic teaching staff. The Faculty of Philology and Philosophy followed the common model in pre-war Baltic universities, putting them together. The Faculty of Economics and Law reflects the pragmatic solution because many educated legal experts and lawyers were available at the Baltic University. To be honest, less economists were at the Baltic University. The Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Sciences, the Faculty of Agriculture and Forestry, and the Faculty of Medicine, Faculty of Chemistry, Mechanical Engineering also followed traditional academic system. However, the field of engineering belonged in the Baltic as well in Germany in those times to the profile of so-called technical universities, like today in Germany, Technische Universitäten. The Faculty of Architecture and Engineering was obviously an opportunist solution when sketching the academic structure of the Baltic universities, something really very unique. To create a Baltic Baltic University as a mutual enterprise of 3 Baltic refugee groups was a unique project to do. Thus, the administration and leadership of a university had to consider the parity between 3 ethnic groups. At the top of the academic and administrative hierarchy of a Baltic university stand the president, followed by 3 national rectors, 1 chancellor, and respectively 3 national secretaries. As much as I've learned from some readings, this kind of system of decision-making functioned without any conflicts and abuses. One must also add here that the main language of a communication among the academic procedures of a Baltic university was still what? Russian? German? English? German. Although with an increasing role of English used in official documentation. I provoked you with Russian because many of these faculty members who served Baltic University had Russian education in these universities and their own years. The studies of a new university commenced first in Hamburg in March 1946. And the British authorities admitted the facilities of Hamburg Historical Museum for the lecture rooms and offices and some other places. The zoo camp was used as the living space of the students and faculty members. Imagine living together, what it is, ideal university. The first period of a university in Hamburg remained short-timed. After the first 2 semesters, the university was transferred from Hamburg to the neighboring Pinneberg. It's around 20 kilometers from the city or half an hour railway. When the whole modern military quarters of Luftwaffe were given over to the university. The activities of the Baltic University ceased in Pinneberg by the end of September 1949. Despite of serious efforts, the lifeline of a university was short because the increasing overseas immigration quickly diminished the number of students and professors. Although some preparations were made to transfer the Baltic University in corpore to the United States or Canada, this project was soon dropped. Altogether, 2,006 students were enrolled to the Baltic University, 1,200 Latvians, 545 Lithuanians, and 260 Estonians. Only 76 students, including 6 Estonians, graduated full studies of a university. The majority of students dropped the courses because of various reasons, perhaps already calculating the peregrinatio to the universities in Germany or some other countries. So the faculty of the Baltic University, I'm now not boring you with my text only, but let's have a look on the gallery. I'm starting here with Professor Fritzis Kulbis, Latvian physicist, who once served as a pro-rector, vice president of the University of Latvia, and became the first president of a Baltic university. On these slides now, next in this gallery, I'm also demonstrating what happened to them. We know that Fritzis Kulbis served later on the McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, in Canada, as a professor of physics. He died pretty early in 1956. So, second founding father of a Baltic university belongs now to Estonian scholarly world, Professor Ernst Öpik, astronomer and astrophysicist, who graduated University of Moscow, was absolutely fluent on 3-4 languages, served University of Tartu, and became the Estonian chancellor. Some books say still the Estonian rector of a Baltic university. And he counts as one of the most renowned Estonian scholar in exile while he served the Armagh Observatory in Northern Ireland almost until his death. Second Latvian, Professor Edgars Tunstorfs, historian, economic historian, who was a professor at Latvian University and served as a professor of Baltic University as well, and was a Latvian rector of Baltic University. And later on, he left for Australia. He was a professor of University of Melbourne in Australia, and he's an author. I've read his books. It's 59 scholarly books edited by Edgars Tunstorfs. Really a great, great achievement. He was a great fan of Scout movement, even in Australia. Now, Vladas Stanka, Lithuanian fourth founding father, professor of law, and Lithuanian rector of a Baltic University. He was later on the president of a Baltic University at the very end. He left for the United States. I do not possess any data what happened to him in North America. Well, I'm continuing this gallery with two fantastic men from Lithuania, so-called famous Biržiška brothers. Mykolas Biržiška, literary scholar, politician, was served as a professor of literature, University of Kaunas, was a rector of Vilnius University in 43-44, and he moved later on to the United States, 1949 already. And his younger brother, Viktoras Biržiška, mathematician, and very many the documents I read about him, he's an encyclopedist. He knows everything. He was a fantastic memory. Professor of mathematics at the University of Kaunas, then at Vilnius University, and he left for the United States in 1950. Following the gallery now with a brother of Ernst Öpik, Professor Armin Öpik, Estonian geologist and paleontologist, and he served Baltic University as a professor of geology and left for Australia when he headed the Bureau of Mineral Resources in Melbourne. Not exactly as a faculty member at Baltic University. Professor Julius Mägiste, a famous linguist and was one of the initiators of a Baltic University, but suddenly he turned around and he left 1945 already for Sweden. He became the assistant professor of Finno-Ugric languages at the University of Lund in Sweden. And one more guru from Estonia, Professor Elmar Järvesoo, who got his doctorate from Berlin, 1939, served University of Tartu, was one of the most active members of Estonian faculty at the Baltic University. And later on, he served the University of Massachusetts in Amherst and was very active to recreating creating the ties between Estonia after 1988. Well, no picture here. Professors are around. One of them, who served even as an Estonian rector of Baltic University, famous Estonian linguist from Indiana University later on. And as we know, he is a father of Estonian historian Toivo Raun. So, Karl Raun, closer to Toronto community, where he served later on as a professor of Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo. Now, this kind of gallery can be followed with a long list. It's a variety of professions, variety of interesting men and women who got their very first academic start at Baltic University. The less known side of these activities of a university are publications and periodicals. These are bibliographic rarities, the bulletins, contributions, multilingual journal, and let me say, Lux Aeterna, Christian students' magazines, all in a very bad paper printed, but still interesting ones. Like this one here, from Karl Edos Petersons, Edgar Stunsdorf's. And finally, what it is, what was it? Why this? Should we appreciate it as a great achievement? Yes, without any doubts. This was a Baltic scholarly unity and cooperation par excellence, no doubt. Second, this was a gateway for the students and professors for their further academic education and career in various countries, in the United States, Canada, Australia, Germany, Sweden, less in Germany, by the way. And the third one, the creating the academic tradition in exile, creating and transforming these ideas of Baltic scholarship in various kind of institutes, like the Baltic Institute in Germany and in Sweden. And last but not least, this kind of idea, tradition, was carried on until the founding of the Association for the Advancement of Baltic Studies in North America, 1968. This is a continuity which is going on. Well, what remains today? Late Professor Tulviste, the rector of Tartu University, asked me at the end of last century to visit Pinneberg and to give a welcoming speech to the members who were coming together from the former students and faculty members of Baltic University. Believe me, this kind of day was very strange. I haven't seen such a full audience of elderly people, full energy. Believe me, now they have almost all gone. Very few members are still alive. But let's the good memory of the Baltic University once a very unique enterprise. Let's keep it alive. Thank you so much.
We have time for maybe 2 short questions, answers.
Thank you. My name is Markus Felke from Bonn University, Germany. And I was just wondering, when you showed us these pictures of the men who worked at Baltic University, you had one person who made his degrees in 1939 at the German University Berlin during Nazi reign. And you showed us persons who were active at Tartu University and other Baltic universities during German occupation, in some cases in German, during German and Soviet occupation. And you didn't spend one single word about that. So I would just like to know, what do you think about this? And I would also like to say that this is also a part of the heritage of Baltic University, that we have academic staff that collaborated in one way or the other way with occupiers. we should have that in mind without any morality. No? Don't misunderstand me, but I would just like to know what you think about this. Thank you.
Well, let me start from the very end. We can't here be absolutely out of any kind of morality. Everybody who is answering your question should take some kind of moral position. But moral positions should be explained by details. Elmar Järvesoo, who got the doctorate from the University of Berlin on agronomy, 1939, is perhaps agronomy was not Nazi-minded agronomy. I do believe so. Knowing personally Elmar Järvesoo, and I guess we have Inno Salasoo perhaps also met Elmar Järvesoo. He was a politically absolutely liberal man, for instance. Secondly, Professor Carl Laun, who got his doctorate on law from Hamburg University in 1945, was absolutely a young man, and I do believe that the winds of the Nazi time legal studies were out from Hamburg University in 1949. So those who served, well, in details, I don't know how much collaborationists were those Lithuanians who served the Vilnius University under German occupation, or other people who served Tartu University during German occupation 1943-44. But there is one moment, maybe I forgot to mention it. Everybody who was accepted as a teaching faculty or even students were screened by British officials. So it means actually that those who participated in the Nazi German army, even in Wehrmacht, were not accepted to the Baltic University even as students, not to say about the faculty members. Well, as an historian, I always say there is no black-white solutions. I do believe that there are some former German soldiers from Estonia, Latvia, or Lithuania were still students, or even some faculty members. So I'm not denying the collaboration, but I want to say that perhaps this hasn't somehow labeled the image of a Baltic University altogether. Or otherwise, I know the discussions we're running even today about the post-war Germany, particularly while visiting for a longer time the University of Köln. And I know what happened to the University of Köln during Nazi time and so on. So yes and no. I can't give you an absolutely clear answer because this is out of my research. Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you, Jüri. But I think we should move forward with our next speaker, who is our last person to ask a question. Markus Welke comes from Bonn University, and he's going to talk about Baltic diaspora in Bonn, Germany, a forgotten memorial site of Baltic exile in Germany after World War II.
Where is it? Ladies and gentlemen, before I start my remarks, I would like to add something to what was just said before. When you look at German historiography, now we have a new way of looking at collaboration. We don't look at it anymore morally, saying, how could you have done this, or something like that. We look at the structures that made people work together with occupiers. So, and for me as a German scholar, it's just some kind of an instinct and reflex when I look at Baltic history, Baltic scholars, etc., and see these numbers, and then I just have to think about that. That's about collaboration issues. So just to explain once again my question. Okay. I would like to begin my remarks today with an observation I made in 2014 when I attended this huge conference at Tallinn University. It was called 70 aastat suurest põgenemisest, 70 years since the Great Flight of 1944 that brought about 70,000 Estonians to the West. This conference was attended by a large group of former Geislingers, from former Estonian displaced persons who had grown up at the famous Geislingen DP camp in Germany. We will have a movie about that after my presentation. And these Geislingers now were living mainly in the United States and visited this conference. And I especially remember one older lady, a very powerful person and very quick with, to some extent, very harsh remarks and commentaries on what the scholars presented. I was one of the victims of such remarks of hers. Okay, I don't want to talk about that special experience now. I just want to point out that this lady was absolutely astonished to hear during my presentation that a significant number of Baltic DPs in general and Estonian displaced persons in particular stayed in Germany instead of migrating to countries overseas like the United States, like she and her parents did. I have the impression, please correct me if I'm wrong, that the Western occupational zones of Germany and especially the later Federal Republic of Germany have more or less gone out of scholarly attention when it comes to examine Baltic diaspora after World War II. I would even argue that this process could be described as a form of marginalization. In the worldwide historiography, Baltic diaspora in Germany is still marginalized, even in my special field of scientific interest, which is displaced persons research. Okay, so I would like to direct, just a moment. I would like to direct, or let's better say redirect, your esteemed attention to the city of Bonn, situated in the very far west of today's Germany on the Rhine River. As you can see here, and from 1949 until the German reunification, the capital of the Federal Republic of Germany. From 1955 on, DPs in Germany were called Heimatlose Ausländer, homeless foreigners, after the Allied High Commission had handed over DPs into the responsibility of the young Federal Republic of Germany. You can see here Petersburg Castle on a hill near Bonn. This was the headquarters of Allied High Commission until 1952. It's still a hotel and a restaurant up there. Yes, about 150,000 DPs still lived in Germany, among them about 20,000 Balts or Balts. There were manifold reasons why DPs stayed in Germany instead of emigration in the framework of the resettlement program of the International Refugee Organization, IRO. You might know that many just were not allowed to emigrate. They were physically too ill. The key word is here shadow on the lung, tuberculosis, or mentally ill as a late result of their sufferings they had experienced during World War II, or they were just too old, or they had a family that was too big with too many little children, or they were not able to work in the professions that were required in the countries worldwide that were willing to receive DPs. And you all know that the history of Baltic DPs is always written as a history of brain drain. The collective of 200,000 Baltic DPs who made it to Germany seems to have consisted only of artists, professors, and scholars of all kind. We already talked about the Baltic University. These are pictures and movie stills I took from Helga Merritt's website from her great movie about the Baltic University. It is the Baltic University in Hamburg and Pinneberg was the most visible expression of this picture of the academic and intellectual Baltic DP. It is reported that about 2,600 Baltics got through the Baltic University, and at the same time giving a small fraction of scholars from Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia the opportunity to continue their scientific work in exile as academic instructors, etc. A lot of those students later made it to German universities to complete their studies, and next to the Baltic University, several thousand Balts took their chance to enlist to German universities. As they didn't think about the Baltic University first, they went to a German university near their DP camp, and so did the other DP nations who lived in Germany. Bonn University was one of the German universities who accepted DPs, and of the German universities in the British zone of occupation, it was, as far as we know, the most important site for all DPs who wanted to go to a university. Between 1945 and 1950, about 350 DP students per semester were enrolled at the university, with a quantity of about 150 to 190 Baltic students in each semester. Compared to the amount of estimated 200,000 Baltic DPs who lived in the DP camps in Germany, it becomes clear that this was only a minority who made it to the universities. But it is that very specific minority that is in the public mind when questions of Baltic diaspora are at all discussed in the general and scientific public, at least in my home country, Germany, as far as my experience goes. Bonn, and now we are back at the actual topic, became an important center of the Baltic academic diaspora in Germany, at least temporarily. I want to start with the Baltic Christian Students Association. German abbreviation is BCSB. The one or the other among you might know this institution. The BCSB was founded in 1947 in Rendsburg, in the northern part of the British zone of occupation in Germany, in today's Schleswig-Holstein, a German federal land between the North and the Baltic Sea. Pastor or Reverend Jacek Urce, you can see him here in the big picture, had stranded in the DP camps of Lübeck, like so many other Baltic DPs, and there he did services for the Lithuanian and the Latvian inhabitants. Besides, he took care of Baltic youths and students in the DP camps in the region. He was member of a Latvian Christian association, just a moment, that had been re-established in exile and traveled around the DP camps in the region in order to create a new Baltic Christian youth and student organization. There obviously was a great need among Baltic DPs to rely on religion in order to get along with the horrible experiences during World War II and the flight to the West. In the camps, Urce also met former members of the Christian Students Associations from Interwar, Lithuania and Estonia, and during this period he must have developed a plan to create the Baltic Christian Students Association, a plan that was fulfilled in 1947, as I told you. We don't have the time now here to illuminate the whole history of the BCSB. The main aims of this organization were to lead Baltic students to the Christian faith and to make them live like the disciples of Jesus. This is really written down like this in the rules and regulations of the BCSB. And to unite Baltic students in exile, Bible study, ecumenism, and preparing Baltic students to become missionaries. The BCSB had an Estonian, Latvian, and Lithuanian sector with own national secretaries, and a lot of discussion groups and collegiate workshops were organized in the beginning, giving the members the opportunity to reflect their current situation and to seek consolation and deliverance in faith. When you read the existing archival material from the early period of the BCSB, all this religious content sounds really strange, especially when you are not so deeply rooted in Christianity like many people are nowadays. But apart from that, it is obvious that the BCSB offered its members a kind of spiritual homeland in exile, a function of major importance, as I would like to argue, that shouldn't be underestimated. 1949 was a year of caesura for the BCSB. The amount of members had declined rapidly since the IRO executed its resettlement program. Pastor Urce now developed the plan to create a Baltic center as a result of a religious vision. According to his still living son Andres Urce, Pastor Urce was some kind of mystic, but without being a religious fanatic. In 1949, the Urce family lived in a DP camp near Cologne. Cologne is near Bonn, And there Oreste got the tip that there was an airfield near Bonn where he might be able to build a prosperous center that turned out to be a student's home for mainly Baltic DP students. And that's what he did. As you can see here on these pictures, this is the Hangela airfield near Bonn, totally in ruins, as you can see here. The picture in the middle, this seems to be the group of students who lived there, walking around. The picture above on the right side, this was the ruins where the students' home was built up. The first thing, or the first room that was ready for use was a little chapel, as you can see over here in the left side. On the right-hand side, you have a picture of an international work camp. Pastor Urze managed to get money from the Federal Republic of Germany, and also managed to organize international students from Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and other countries who got together and built up this students' home. And in the middle, you have a picture of the girls' room. Sexes were separated. Yes, and maybe you know this little booklet, A Christian Student's Home. This was issued to make people give money for the further financing of the BCSB and this student's home. Yeah, from Hangela Airfield, the students, about 23 in 1952, so really a small amount of people, had to travel a long way to Bonn University. Maybe you know Bonn University. It's this beautiful castle in the middle of the city, was in ruins partly at the end of World War II. In 1952, BCSB had to leave Hangela since the Bundeswehr, the army of the Federal Republic of Germany, needed the Hangela airfield, and after another religious vision, Pastor Urze managed to purchase the former manor of Annaberg, situated on a hill southwest from downtown Bonn. As you can see, a major advancement. I think these pictures speak for themselves. BCSB is still there, now under a different name. It's only called a Baltic Christian Association. It's some kind of a hostel, and existing Baltic exile organizations in Germany come together there. For example, the Estonian EUSL, you might know this organization. They commemorated the 100th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence this year, sorry. Probably the existence of BCSB at Hangela and then Annaberg fostered the location of another important Baltic joint venture in exile in Bonn, the Baltic Research Institute, BFI. For a very long time, it has been handed on in research, in case the BFI has ever been mentioned at all, that this institution was the successor of the Baltic University after its closing in 1949. I was able to show that this is not true, at least not in general. As you can see here, after the closing of the Baltic University, a Baltic Institute was founded, Hamburg and Bonn, and this institute was the successor of Baltic University. This little picture shows Eduard Sturms. He was the leader of this Baltic Institute in the very beginning. Yes, but this Baltic Institute would have been forced to end all its activities if there hadn't been an initiative of Baltic scholars in Swedish exile and protagonists of notorious German Ostforschung to create a Baltic Academy. As a short explanation, Ostforschung was a very specific German interdisciplinary scientific way developed after World War I in the face of the huge losses of territories of Germany in Eastern Europe, to prove and to declare that Eastern Europe, including the Baltic states, of course, would never have reached the current state of civilization if there hadn't been German colonization. After World War II, the rests of Ostforschung who had survived World War II managed to re-establish again for a while, although they were more than thoroughly discredited by the implementation of Ostforschung's research results by the Nazis in Eastern Europe. The German part of the initiative to establish a Baltic Academy thought about creating some kind of elite university whose graduates were to be influenced to fulfill German interests in a prosperous, free Baltic region. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, some people obviously thought that this was still possible. Staff from the former Baltic University who remained in Germany and other Baltic scholars in Western European exile took part in these plans, mainly because this was a chance for them to get on with their scientific work and to earn money. Yes, you might know Edgar Kant. He was the rector of Tartu University during the Nazi occupation of Estonia. He accompanied the founding of this Baltic Research Institute from Sweden, and Estonian exile circles in Sweden didn't like him really very much, as far as I could find out, because he was a Nazi director of University of Tartu. He had problems in the Estonian exile circles in Sweden. And the documents you can see here, I don't know if you can read the names properly. These are documents showing that Baltic German scholars like, just a moment, Wittram, for example, and others, they have been members of this Baltic Research Institute. And the document on the left, this is for Professor Gunther Ibsen. He was a protagonist of Ostforschung, and he was the strong force on the German side to implement the Baltic Academy. So, and here we have once again Eduard Sturms and his wife Edith Sturms, a very interesting couple. They both worked at Latvian University as well during the Soviet occupation of Latvia as during the Nazi occupation of Latvia. And Zenonas Ivinskis, he was, as I found out in the literature, the most famous or the best well-known historian of Lithuania in the interwar period. These three people and a few other people were among the leading personnel, the leading staff of the Baltic Research Institute. To keep it short, the German plans to establish a Baltic elite academy were not fulfilled. It never reached this status of an academy educating a Baltic elite. It was closed in 1972, and until then, on the one hand, it was nothing more and nothing less than an island of Baltic scientific bliss. And on the other hand, it provided, like BCSB, a kind of scientific Baltic homeland in exile. From 1963 to 1972, BFI was part of the Department of Eastern European History at Bonn University, complementing the university calendar with lectures on Baltic history. And large parts of the library of the Baltic University were in the possession of the BFI and were integrated into the library of the Department of Eastern European History. Unfortunately, almost the whole inventory was destroyed, since almost nobody was able anymore to read Latvian, Estonian, or Lithuanian after the BFI had been closed. And it should not be forgotten, in the 1950s, the BFI had close ties with the organizations of German expellees in the Federal Republic of Germany. Before the Baltic Christian Students Association came to Bonn, Baltic DP students made themselves heard at Bonn University and organized several events to commemorate the occupation of Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania. According to the sources, these events were noticed by the public of Bonn. Annaberg was also the headquarters of the Working Committee of the Baltic Students in Germany, or the Central Committee of Lithuanian Students. In 1958, this Central Committee of Lithuanian students organized a ceremony to commemorate Lithuanian independence in 1918, joined by former protagonists of Ostforschung. In 1965, the Working Committee of the Baltic Students in Germany held a torchlight procession on the ground of Bonn University in order to keep Baltic issues in the public discourse. In the end of the 1960s, Pastor Urze started to establish contacts to the Latvian Soviet Republic, and this caused big troubles among Latvian exile circles in Germany, including a denunciation at the German Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution. And when the recovery of Baltic independence was up to become reality, Annaberg, now under the conduct of the son of Pastor Urze, Andres Urze, turned into some kind of diplomatic center for Baltic politicians who wanted to get in touch with the government of the Federal Republic of Germany. And for a very short time, Andres Urze even officiated as some kind of first ambassador of independent Latvia and found rooms in Bonn where the first embassies of Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania were placed. All these things I could only crack superficially are now widely forgotten as far as I can see, and there's only one little plate on the exterior walls of Annaberg reminding of its function as a center of Baltic diaspora students, fixed by a local historical initiative. On the territory of Bonn University, nothing remains of or commemorates the Baltic students who were there. And I want to ask you, isn't this a task for an organization like the Baltic Heritage Network to take action in order to change that? Although I have no real good idea at the moment how to do that. Well, should we carry out pressure on Bonn University in order to make them fix a plate of commemoration on the walls of the university? Would that be of any interest for Baltic historiography? Or should we collect money to inspire Helga Meritz, for example, to do one of her awesome documentaries again, this time on Bonn, the BFI, and the BCSB? In this context, I can only hope that I can contribute with the research I have done on BFI and BCSB in efforts to keep the knowledge of Bonn as a memorial site of Baltic exile in Germany alive, in Germany as well as in the Baltic states. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Markus. So never-ending fields of work for all of us. Questions to our speaker? Or comments? Yeah.
Thank you for very interesting insight. We had here a question, actually, two of us. In this kind of Christian organization, Lithuanians and Latvians work together. What about their confession? Catholics and Protestants together?
Yes, Pastor Urze was, I don't know how to say that in English, he didn't care about the faith that people had. He was ecumenic in a certain kind of way. Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians were able to work together. As far as I know, there have been tensions, of course, but yeah. As far as I know, this is still very important for the successing organization, ecumenic position. Yeah. Over there.
Who paid the
Of
salaries?
Whom? Whose salaries? From BCSB or? Yes, BCSB was always very short of money. They didn't have many members who didn't pay regularly their member fees. Pastor Urze was always very busy with collecting money from the government of the land of North Rhine-Westphalia, and he was very successful in doing so. He was able to get a certain amount of money for each student he had in his student's home, and he also got funding from a few Baltic exile organizations, but it was always a fight to get the money together. And the BFI was financed in the beginning by the federal government of Germany, but this was not to be well presented too openly in the public. It was feared that the Soviet Union might cause diplomatic trouble if this gets known. And in the 1960s, Federal Republic of Germany decided to stop to give the money. And the BFI was inserted into Bonn University, and now they got regular salaries from like other staff members of a university get. But this was also always a fight. For example, Zenonas Iwinskis, he was a professor, but he was not given the money a professor should get. He got much less money. He always had to fight to have enough money to take care of him and his family. Yeah, this was a major problem. So it was the same with Edith Sturms. When her husband died, she was still she still worked at the university as a philologist, and it was very hard to keep her working. We have strict laws in Germany. When you have reached a certain age, you have to retire, and she was older, and it was somehow made possible that she could stay with a small amount of money. It was always a big problem.
Thank you very much. And I think we should move forward. And our third paper on this session is again about the Balts in Germany. And Helga Merritt has finalized her last documentary. And I'm pretty sure that we all have seen her earlier films, which are getting every time deeper and better, and they are always also very moving. So first she will give a talk, and afterwards we can see film, and then I'm pretty sure that we will have a small discussion after the film.
Well, thank you very much, in any case, Piret, that I'll be able to talk a little bit about the research I've done for the film about Geislinger. Because when I'm making a documentary, it's this kind of research, and this is in the film, and that's sometimes quite frustrating. So it's nice to be able to talk about it. First of all, it will be in the film, but maybe not everyone knows about Geislingen. Geislingen was a refugee camp, or I should say Geislingen is a small town in the southern part of Germany. And after the Second World War, it was in the American zone. And it was decided that Geislinger would become an assembly center for Estonians. So some 4,000 Estonians lived in Geislinger from approximately 1945 to 1950. And they lived in private houses. And that was, though it happened more, it was quite unique. In fact, I should even say, I talk about Geislingen, but it is Geislingen an der Steige. And I know because when I went with the cameraman to Geislingen, and I couldn't find where our hotel was, they very kindly said to us, you have to go back 100 kilometers because Geislingen is not Geislingen an der Steige, that's a different town. The first time I heard about this refugee camp, Geislinger, was from a classmate of my father's. And he had lived in Geislinger with his sisters and his mother. And I had him on the phone lots of time. He emigrated to Australia, and I corresponded with him. And always when he talked about Geislinger, it was like he longed for Geislinger because he had such fond memories of the place. And this really made me curious. So I went to Geislinger, looked around, went to the archive, and to my surprise, there was nothing in the archive about this refugee camp. I tried to find German inhabitants who had to leave their houses in favor of the German refugees. And they should have been there, but nobody was willing to talk. I placed advertisements in the local newspapers, in the somewhat bigger newspapers, asking for people to share their stories, and unfortunately, no one came forward. Later, I talked with Bernhard Stiller. Bernhard Stiller was a history teacher in Geislingen, and he discovered at a certain moment that there had been something like a refugee camp for Estonians in Geislingen. And he had never heard about it. And he, even as a German and living in the area, found it difficult to find people to be able to talk about it. And well, I have to say it made me more curious, and I wanted to find out why Geislingen, why the Estonians, and why in private houses. In the book of Bernhard Stille, it's mentioned that Geislingen was a town where Hitler, but also other party leaders who were already hosted before Hitler came in power. And so it was called a kind of Nazi town. Ferdinand Kohl, in his book, also refers to the fact that there were luxury houses for Nazi prominent people in Geislingen. So the idea was it maybe a punishment for the people living there? So this is in the books, but like Ferdinand Kohl, he doesn't refer to any sources he had the information from, and Bernhard Stille didn't have any sources or documents, so I tried to find out. And so I looked into UNRWA papers, because UNRWA was a refugee organization, came in May to Geislingen. And I tried to find, so the supervisor of UNRWA, the UNRWA team, 190 in Geislingen, was in Ulm, and tried to find if there were any papers from the supervisor. And then there was the military government, and that was in Göppingen, and to see if there were any papers. And that was research was done in New York, especially NARA archives and other kind of archives. And for me, speaking of frustration, the most frustrating thing was that I found papers of May 1945, June 1945, July, August, September, November, December, and nothing about October. And in October, this refugee camp was set up. And I wanted to know who made the decision and what was the kind of cooperation with the German city council. But there was nothing. And still, once every while, I'll send out a message, because it's not only frustrating, it's irritating that you just can't find it and that you think it should be there, it must be there somewhere. Maybe in another archive, maybe, even in a private archive, I don't know. But so I don't have this information. I do know that there must have been a meeting between the Americans and the city council, because I found documents that when the camp was closed, there was a meeting again between the city council and the Americans, and then they refer to this first meeting when the camp was set up. But what I did find something. It was not that I ended up with nothing at all. And so what I did find out is that the situation in Geislingen and Geislingen area was quite chaotic around the summer of 1945. In Geislingen, there were 6 small refugee camps, and it was mainly forced laborers from Poland, Ukraine, Yugoslavia. There were some 100 people from Estonia, and the same amount from Latvia and Lithuania. And as the situation was chaotic, so quite a few Estonians went away from Geislingen when the war had ended. And what happened was that the people from Poland and Ukraine knew they were going to be repatriated, and they had nothing to lose. So there was a group of about 120 people roaming around the area, looting, and someone was at a certain moment killed. There were other aggressive facts which were registered. And so the American army thought, we really have to do something about the situation. They blamed UNRWA. They blamed UNRWA because they said UNRWA didn't have a clue at all what they were going to do when they arrived in the area of Geislingen. Whether it was fair to blame UNRWA, I don't know, because the UNRWA people were trained in Jouville, Normandy, that was France. But at the UNRWA center in Jouville, they didn't have a clue either how to train the people and what to expect when the war had ended. So when the war had ended, 7 people of 5 different nationalities, where I think it was 1 car, they were sent to Geislingen, and they had to do a certain job, and their job was not, they had no idea what this job would be, and I don't even know if they were able really to communicate with one another. But the American army and the military government blamed UNRWA and said we had to do it in a different way. At the same time, what was happening was that in United States, the Harrison Report was published. And the Harrison Report was made because there were not only rumors, but documents and facts that a lot of refugees, and this was most of all about the Jewish refugees, they were still, in the summer of 1945, they were still living in the same barracks they were living in during the war. So something needed to happen. And the reaction of President Truman to this report was that there should be proper housing for refugees. And he states himself that private houses should be taken because he thinks that the Germans should bear the responsibilities for what had happened during the Second World War. So it's in fact Truman who decides to take the private houses. So it was, if you read this, then you know not just Geislingen was punished, but other towns as well, where the private houses were taken. And these two things came together, plus the fact that the American army wanted to repatriate the people as quickly as possible. And a way to do it was to make camps with just one nationality. So there would become a Polish camp, a Ukrainian camp. Some camps were Baltic camps because it was already clear that people from the Baltic countries would not be repatriated. But also in Geislingen became Estonian and Esslingen became Latvian. And I'm afraid I don't remember now what became the Lithuanian camp, but I know that Augsburg became a Baltic camp. Why exactly Geislingen became an Estonian camp, also for this, I don't have the documents, but what I've read in the documents was that the cooperation with, the Estonians, with the UNRWA and with the American people who were there at Geislingen went very well. And so this might have been the reason that the Estonians got his assembly center in Geislingen. And so the camp was established in October 1945, and there were 3 districts. They started with 2 districts of the town. The German people had to leave their houses. They had to remain in Geislingen because the situation was too chaotic and they didn't want to have too many people on the road. And so they had to be housed in Geislingen itself. But because so many Estonians were coming at once to Geislingen, they took one other district as well. And from the period of that the camp is established, there is quite some information, and there are lots of documents, and there are books, and there are stories. And now, because just to show one small fragment of the research I've done, I have looked into the police chronicles. And that's where the title of the lecture comes from, The Blonde Lady Who Found the Grey Glove. This is from the police chronicles. The reason why I also looked into the police chronicles is that during my study of philosophy, I read the work of Michel Foucault, but also of the American historian Robert Darnton. And they insist, during research, look into the police chronicles because they say something about the society, they say something about the norms, they say something about how the groups in society work together. And in Geislingen, in the camp itself, you had the Estonian police. In Geislingen, you had the German police, and then you had the American military police. In fact, I've only found 2 elaborate documents of police reports, so that's not that many. And one is a sad case. This is the case of an Estonian man who committed suicide. And the UNRWA has been making clear that there will be a selection process in the camp. Who has a right to stay in the camp, who doesn't have a right to stay in the camp. This man was a farmer, and he had been taken into the German army, forced into the German army in 1943, together with his horse, is in the documents. And he tried to escape, and by escaping, he injured himself. He lost a leg, and so he was an invalid, and he was also without papers. And he was so frightened that he couldn't, just show by documents that he was coming from Estonia, that he couldn't go back, that he decided to commit suicide. And what you see from these papers is that this police report was made by the German police for the Estonian community, but also for the American military police, that they had no clue whatsoever what it meant to introduce a selection procedure, and all the fear which came with it, they didn't know, because they were not going to repatriate anyone, but they didn't make clear beforehand, we're going to have a selection procedure, but nobody will be going to be sent back to the Soviet zone or the Soviet Union. So this was one of the police reports. The other one is about a plum tree raid. And this is that 3 young women, and they are the daughters of the owner of one of the houses where the Estonians are housed. In the summer of 1947, they sneak into the camp because the Germans were not allowed to come in, and they go to their plum tree and they try to get the plums. And in the report it states that one young woman was in the tree and was shaking the tree, and the other 2 were just trying to get the plums. And as it was forbidden, someone tries to get the Estonian police because they need to say something to the girls, and the girls notice that they are watched, try to escape, and one of the refugees is being hit on the head and the shoulders. Happily, it's not a very severe injury, but the police is coming, there's a statement, there's another statement, and there's another statement, and then it becomes clear that the owners of the house had come to the house already two days before, sneaked into the house, and tried to get into the cellar. It didn't work out, and they are angry and they scream, we'll take revenge, and the Russians will come soon, and you have no idea how well organized we were. And then they went away. Because nothing happened. It didn't went at first in the police reports, but because the daughters come back, it's in the police reports. Now, it's the summer of 1947, and in 1947, UNRWA had ceased to exist and IRO took its place. And with the organization of IRO, so the International Refugee Organization, you can say that the cold temperatures between Soviet Union and America and the other Western countries becomes a fact, because UNRWA was in favor of repatriation and IRO is about emigration, and the Soviet Union didn't agree. So when you read the statement in this police report, it could be possible that something of this had appeared in the newspapers. But I also guess that it was summer and the fruit was ripe, and the Germans had a bad food situation. The food situation of the Estonians was not very well, but it was worse for the German population. And so they must just have been very tempted to go to their own tree and get the fruit. And probably in the cellar, like you have in houses, that the jars with fruit and vegetables and anything else would have been there, and they came to pick up their jars of fruits or anything else. 2 years had already passed that the refugee camp was there, and 2 years they had been deprived of their fruit and their vegetables. So maybe they just thought it was time to get what they still thought that this belonged to them. So only 2 cases, and that is in itself very surprising if you see that there are these 3 sectors of town where the refugees live, and the German population. It's a crowded town, and they are deprived of a lot of goods and a lot of food. So these are the major police reports, but there were lots and lots of small reports, and these were published in the information bulletins. And the information bulletins were published 2-3 times a week. This was not just with police reports. The major thing which was written about is cleaning. And this was because after the First World War, there was the Spanish flu. And already during the Second World War, they were thinking, how can we prevent that something like the Spanish flu or any other contagious disease will break out after the war? So there were really very strict orders and rules about cleaning. And I must say, in these information bulletins, I read so much about cleaning that I can't say my own house has become more clean, but I'm very much aware that it's not clean. And so this is the major thing in the information bulletins. Then one of the major items is emigration. So you have the mass emigration announcements. It's first Belgium, it's looking for minors. And then it's the westward hoe of England, which is looking for minors, agriculture, industry, and women for nursing, cleaning, maids. And they are all looking for single, healthy young people. France is looking for minors. Holland is looking for minors and people for the textile industry. And it's only if it's 1949, 1950, that you see that some countries all of a sudden realize that there are highly educated refugees. And if you see what is asked for by some South American countries, but also a country like Pakistan, you have the idea that they want to create new universities only with the search and the help of refugees. So they ask for professors, in fact, for every subject. And just to make clear that there are things which never ever change. In 1949, Colombia was looking for a professional football player, and younger than 30, and which was quite unique, that the family situation was not important, but what was important is that he played well. And it stated that the salary would be sufficient. So this is all in the information bulletins, and there are these police chronicles. There is not so much happening in the camp. And the main reason is, if you wanted to emigrate, you needed to have a document of good behavior. Because if you didn't have a document of good behavior, you were just not able to emigrate. And if you were arrested and if something happened, you could lose also immediately your DP status, and you had to leave the camp, and you didn't have any help. So there were lots of reasons, just to take very good care of what you were doing. So these police chronicles in the information bulletins, there are warnings about false money, warnings not to let unknown people into your house, warnings that some copper rings are sold as if they are golden rings, and all other kinds of warnings. There is also warnings about the children, because children were not aware of the boundaries of the refugee camp and the meadows and parks and places of the German populations. So there were warnings, watch for the children where they are playing, because they are not allowed to play there. There are also warnings that they shouldn't scream or have loud behavior. And it's all the time, it's the Estonians should not have a bad reputation. This is coming back and back in all these documents. And then it becomes clear that some of the screaming is not only done by the children, but also by the adults, and that when they are leaving the canteen or they are leaving a party, that they are screaming, and they shouldn't do that. So that is a clear warning as well. But the majority of fact is just objects found and objects lost. And they are all well documented. It's what found, where, what time, brought to the police, and police pick it up. It is about keys, it's glasses, it is shawls, it is sometimes a raincoat, it's children's shoes. Everything is there. But most of all, the gloves are lost. Mostly just one pair, or one of a pair. And this is the kind of announcement which appears in this information bulletin. In fact, it's not the blonde lady who found the glove, it's the blonde lady with glasses who got a grey leather glove given by a German, and please will she bring it back and give it to the police. And what such a small announcement says is that the community was not that small that everybody knew one another by face, because it's the blonde lady with glasses, so they don't know her. But it was small enough that people knew these are Estonians and these are Germans. And what is also clear from such a small announcement is that a glove was something valuable. It's something that if you found it, you try to give it to someone who might have lost it. And if it was not that person, then you brought it to the police. And the police made an announcement, you know, we have found such and such an item. And what it also states that though the German population was not happy with the Estonian population, and the Estonian population not very happy with the German population, there was a kind of civilized behavior between one another. And if you read through all this information, then you can say that despite the circumstances, despite what had happened during the war and the people who were so traumatized, it functioned. Geisling as a refugee camp did function quite well. And in all these documents and in all these papers, I've not been able to find if the blonde lady with glasses, if she really returned this grey leather glove to the police station, and if there was someone who picked it up. But for my part, that is not really bad, because now I can make my own story about it. Thank you very much.